Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second in our series of virtual town hall meetings. My name is Cindy Dodds, and I am ACSI's Professional Development Director. Today, we are going to discuss ways to creatively finish your school year strong. At ACSI, we are tracking your questions and your concerns. These town hall meetings provide a venue for you to hear what others are doing as they confront the current challenges, and they provide you the opportunity to get your questions answered among colleagues and friends. Today's focus is on finding solutions for summative assessments. As we begin, we would love to know more about who is on our call today. Please take a moment to share your school information with us through the questions popping up on your screen at this time. Our speaker today is ACSI President Dr. Larry Taylor. Our panel includes specialists from the ACSI assessment team and experts for legal and accreditation requirements. After our panelists share some important updates, we will open the floor for your questions. If you have not already submitted questions via email, please begin submitting your questions now and throughout the meeting as your questions arise. You can use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. These questions are being monitored and we will present them to our panel. Before we move on to the introduction of our speaker, I would like to introduce you to my co-host and ACSI Vice President of USA, Dr. David Balick.
Thank you, Cindy. Great teaming up with you for our second town hall this week. Special thanks to you and our Learning and Development Manager, Sarah Longcar, for all her hard work in getting us ready for today. Welcome, everyone. Like most of you, I'm hunkering down here at home. So greetings from the deep south, Birmingham, Alabama. I trust that you're hanging in there and staying healthy and positive during these challenging times in which we find ourselves. My one word for 2020 is hope. Isn't that a great word? Boy, if we ever needed hope, it's now, right? As believers, though, we don't hope as the world hopes, do we? A wishful thinking kind of hope. No, thankfully, we can embrace biblical hope during times like this. A confident assurance, rather, that God is on his throne. And while it may look as though things are out of control, behind the scenes, we know that there is a God who has not surrendered his authority. Amen. Just before I pray for us, I want you to listen carefully to these powerful words from Lamentations chapter 3, verses 21 through 26. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him. To the one who seeks him, it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Let's pray together. Father, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to gather today. Thank you for each one represented on this Zoom, for the way in which they are serving and encouraging their staff, their parents, their students all around the world as your hands and your feet. Bless them, Lord. Protect them, that we would know that even though we can't see the whole path ahead, you give us enough light, just enough light to take the next step. Father, we trust you for your continued guidance and provision for such a time as this. And may you, the God of hope, fill us with all joy and peace as we trust in you, so that we would overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And I pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, we're going to hear first today from our ACSI president, Dr. Larry Taylor. Let me tell you just a little bit about him. Prior to joining ACSI, Dr. Larry Taylor served for 20 years as the head of school at Prestonwood Christian Academy in Plano, Texas. Prestonwood Christian serves more than 1,600 students enrolled at 4 campuses as part of its school system. Dr. Taylor has been married to Delinda Rose Taylor for 34 years. They have 5 sons, 3 of whom are married. And it's my understanding that not just 1, but 2 grandchildren are coming soon. So Larry, thanks so much for joining us today, brother.
Thank you, Dr. Balick and Dr. Dodds. And yes, that is 2 grandkids on the way. And good afternoon, everyone. It's such an honor to join you in our series of virtual town hall meetings. But before we dive into today's topic, which deals with fulfilling your promise, summative assessment, I want to make just a few quick comments. One, I want to thank you for joining me in prayer continually for the families and the communities who are dealing with a loved one who's become infected with the COVID-19 virus, or even worse, a loved one or friend who has tragically died from it. I'm so blessed observing how so many are leaning into this crisis with a Christ-like spirit and attitude characterized by selflessness and a commitment to the highest standards of educational excellence. And needless to say, when's the last time the entire globe literally has been impacted, and in most cases even shut down? But the bottom line is that God is in control. And when God is in control, there's no need to fear. It says in Isaiah 41:10, "So do not fear, for I am with you." And I believe that how we react to this situation is being observed by our students, our parents, our communities, other schools. And indeed, it's a big deal that we maintain learning continuity. That's what we're going to talk about today. And that includes assessment. But let's remember that we're also being assessed right now by the groups that I just mentioned, our students, our parents, and so forth, and basically our customers. Your positive, selfless, servant leader and loving attitude, we think will be the difference factor. You know, I was sharing with a group the other day that the early church during the ancient times, they dealt with many epidemics, pandemics, plagues, and historians clearly point out that it was during that time that Christians actually earned a reputation. They stunned their communities by serving the sick and dying, while everyone else ran for the mountains. The Christians served. And during this time, I just would say we are an advertisement for the world to the glory of God. And so let's live, love, and lead in such a way that people will be able to see the excellence and the virtues of God in our lives. Well, the title of this town hall meeting, I think, is somewhat heavy. Yes, it's about assessment, standardized testing. But when you throw in that comment, fulfilling your promise, your commitment, it speaks of the very character and the integrity of your school's core values. And I want to state from the very beginning that you will always know your school better than we will. We are simply giving advice and counsel. From a ministry perspective, finishing strong, as we've all been kind of talking and telling our communities, finishing strong and including testing will turn the current uncertainty into clarity. Clarity eases anxiety, especially when it's a parent wondering if their child has truly finished the year. Will there be gaps in their learning that will surface next year or a few years later, especially when they're entering high school? We as educators in this special partnership with parents have an opportunity to minister by relieving this anxiety. We can turn those subjective feelings that often lead to anxiety to objective-based confidence. And when subjective feelings about one's child are channeled appropriately, it could lead, or if they're channeled inappropriately especially, it could lead to unnecessary dissension, arguments, It can also, I think, financially hurt you when these fillings turn into requests for tuition reimbursement. And so it is a big deal. Educationally, we would say, ask this question: why is this important? Why is summative assessment important? I know many are asking, and probably for two reasons. The most recent from comments made by Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. I have a tremendous amount of respect for her, but on her recent declaration, primarily geared towards public schools. And then secondly, right now, the top thing on everyone's mind is making sure that your online strategies are set up and working. And so I get it. When you think of testing, it really hasn't hit a lot of the radars yet, and I get that. But I want to frame some thoughts with two mental pictures. So I want you to kind of mentally go with me for a second. I want you to think about year-end testing the way you have always done it. All right, you have that picture in your mind. Now, I want you to crumple up that mental picture, because I believe the way most of us will have to do year-end testing will be very different, or at least at a different time, certainly not during the regularly scheduled time. And with that said, and with all due respect to my colleagues who choose or who will choose not to include year-end testing, before a school decides and before you decide this to cancel the year-end testing, I just want to challenge us to think long and hard. What are the reasons we assess? Why do we even conduct standardized testing? It's not because it's a requirement from the state. It's because it's an educationally sound practice. And the testing that we're talking about has nothing to do with the public school testing requirements. And we made a commitment at the beginning of this school year. We were hired to provide a high quality, Christ-centered education. One of our distinctives as a private Christian school, and really one of the very reasons we exist, is to pursue standards of excellence that are not necessarily aligned with state and national mandates. Absolutely, COVID-19 has forced us to adapt how we deliver on our promise. However, we must remain fully committed to each child's learning outcomes. Understandably, we will have to adopt some creative strategies, as we already are, in providing instruction and assessment, but we need to assure our parents that we will align our time and efforts to their child's mastery of this year's curriculum goals and objectives. And this includes continued assessment of their child's learning level with the same mindset. I personally would challenge us with the same mindset as if we were not experiencing this disruption. We have to keep an eye on the child's upcoming school year and the readiness for their next grade level learning objectives. Right after me, you'll be hearing from a group of panelists. I want to frame their primary thoughts, our primary thoughts, and essentially our advice with these following statements. One, testing is a tool that Christian schools can use to assure parents that they are committed to meeting the obligations. Secondly, standardized testing data provides objective, current, and reliable achievement data on the schools and the groups of schools and individual students. That data helps schools make important instructional decisions. And when schools disaggregate that data, they will have the ability to look at the students who excel and the students who struggle relative to that group. If they don't test, certain struggling students may go unrecognized for yet another year. It may even be more important, and this is a powerful comment here, it may be even more important this year that this data be made available at the end of the year, not necessarily at the end of the school year, but at the end of how we extend the school year, be made available. This will allow schools to have a reliable and current data on student achievement. And I think this data will allow schools to focus on individual and group needs early in the year of the upcoming year. It's very, very likely that lost instructional time this spring will contribute to some of the objectives not being met. So we need to know that. We need to know that. So in closing, ACSI, just from our perspective, my perspective, I just want to encourage you not to make any final decisions on canceling testing right now. The situation is still fluid. Thankfully, you're going to hear a little bit later, our vendors have granted extensions all the way through September. We want to offer some creative solutions to fit your standardized testing into the summer or even the beginning of the next school year, and how to look at the data in order to form a baseline for each child to perhaps plan proper interventions. We're all doing virtual learning. Some will get it, others won't. Testing will be our guide to finding the gaps, which we can do, which we can then administer some remedial or even some accelerated programs for the gaps and from those who didn't have gaps. And my final statement pertains to finances. And we realize that many of you might want to conduct testing, but simply cannot afford it due to your financial model that's been totally disrupted over the last couple months. Please let us know this. We will try everything possible to help you financially get this done. Again, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's an honor to serve you.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for reminding us of the importance of finishing the school year strong and letting your light shine in your community as we fulfill our promises. David, I'm going to pass it to you to introduce our panelists.
Very good. Thanks, Cindy. We've got a number of questions coming in, and we're anxious to get to them. But before we do, our panelists are going to share a brief update on what is happening with assessments in light of our current environment. Our panelists today are David Smitherman, Lisa Chubbuck, Dr. Aaron Wilcox, and our in-house counsel for ACSI, Philip Scott. Let's begin with David Smitherman, ACSI's Assessment Program Manager. David?
Thank you, David. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I hope the information that we provide is helpful. We recognize that scheduling and completing spring standardized testing is not a priority for many of you right now. We know that you and your team are reestablishing your instructional and school-wide programs in an unforgiving amount of time with a goal of completing the school year successfully. That is the priority. But neither should standardized testing be totally dismissed. This type of testing and the information that it provides is a teaching tool and can be an important component of a Christian school's instructional program. Our goal today, to provide you with the latest information about ACSI's student assessment program, to discuss the critical nature of assessments, their importance and benefits, especially this year, brainstorm creative ideas for administration, stress the importance of communication to your school community, teachers, students, parents, and provide some training support information. First, let's discuss the ACSI program updates. We'll start with Terra Nova 3, published by Data Recognition Corporation, or DRC. ACSI is providing Terra Nova 3 services this year and next year through the spring of 2021. Our spring testing season regularly runs March through May. This year, DRC has extended that spring testing window through September 18. This means schools can test anytime from now through the summer or after school starts next fall. Spring norms will still apply, and students can take the same test level as they would have this spring. Next, the Iowa assessments, paper, pencil, and online, published by Riverside Insights. The spring testing season, again, regularly runs March through May. This year, Riverside has extended that spring testing window through September 23. Again, this means schools can test anytime from now through the summer or after school starts next fall. Spring norms will apply, again, and students can take the same test level as they would have done this spring. Terra Nova 3 and Iowa Assessment's administration protocols and security remain unchanged. Testing, whether paper, pencil, or online, is never administered in the home. Schools do not need to communicate new testing dates to ACSI or the test publisher unless you want to or are wanting some advice or recommendations. If you have registered for scoring, your test coordinator's kit or scoring services packet can be used within this extended testing window. Schools might want to consider the following regarding rescheduling testing. For example, your school may want to extend the school year an additional week or start the new school year a week early. You could use these unusual days to catch up and review concepts taught via distance learning to make sure that students mastered the material that was taught. This schedule could be combined with testing. Or if in the fall, these testing days could be integrated with fun back-to-school orientations and activities. You could give each day a special activity along with review and testing. Another thought, your school may consider opening up testing dates throughout the summer, maybe by grade level or groups at different times to accommodate your schedule and family schedules. And finally, a school might be concerned about the testing time, the administration time. To reduce testing time, schools might consider administering core content areas such as math, reading, and language only. These are just a few ideas to consider when we look at rescheduling. Now we know that standardized testing data has historically been important to Christian schools. You use it to help understand the effectiveness of your instructional program, to identify academic strengths and weaknesses, to make decisions about curriculum, and to hold yourself accountable to your school community. As well, it can be a great PR tool, and rightly so. We believe, especially this year, that an adjusted approach, in addition, can assist you in successful planning after the events of the school year, after the events of this school year. This is what I mean by that. Lisa Chubbuck is our assessment program trainer. Lisa's focus when working with schools is to help them drill down and analyze the data, whether it's good news or bad news. She then provides direction to create very realistic and practical ways of connecting the data to effective instruction and increase student learning. Especially this year and planning for next year, this approach could provide excellent focus for you and your staff. If you haven't already, you are all becoming experts in communication. If you choose to test this spring, summer, or early fall, communication to your teachers, to your parents, and to your students will play an important role in its success. It will be important to clearly lay out the plan. Here is why we're doing this. At this time, I'd like to pass the baton to Lisa Chubbuck, ACSI's Assessment Program Coordinator.
Thank you, David. So my name is Lisa Chubbuck, and I'm the Assessment Specialist at ACSI. And especially after the events of this spring, and in order to determine student outcomes and develop a plan for instructional change, administering a summative assessment will give students an opportunity to demonstrate what they have learned and can do. So one way to ensure an unbiased assessment of grade level content is to administer a summative assessment like Terra Nova 3 or the Iowa assessment that will provide baseline data that can be easily analyzed using criterion reference scores. Criterion scores are standards-based scores and are very diagnostic. It is not a norm reference score like the national percentile. Using criterion reference scores, a teacher can be strategic in addressing critical needs, challenges, and reinforcing strengths, connecting data to instruction. For example, with Terra Nova 3, the criterion reference score is the objective performance index. It is determined for each objective in a subtest. If I were looking at the language subtests, this score tells me if a student is struggling more specifically with an objective such as sentence structure or writing strategies. These objectives are easily identified by teachers and can be found in pacing guides and textbooks. They provide a clear and simple connection to see what has been mastered and what needs to be improved. This process is successful in working with individuals and groups, so it can assist teachers as well as become a school-wide focus. Right now, schools can use the extended spring testing window through September, and students will take the test at the grade level they are in this spring to obtain baseline data, then analyze and act on the criterion reference scores mentioned to set goals and track improvement. Now, this may seem like a daunting task. However, we are here to support you with training to help you use the criterion reference data. ACSI's Student Assessment Program has various models to support all schools and methods of instruction with your program's available scores. This service is provided in a scheduled and/or customized format for schools as an in-service at a time convenient for you.
Good afternoon. My name is Erin Wilcox, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for Academic Services, and I'm responsible for accreditation and certification, so I was asked to speak on why this is important in the whole area of accreditation. It may be easier not to test this spring, summer, or fall, but an excellent education depends on teachers having accurate information about the starting point for their students. And my goal is to help you look at the role of assessment in the bigger picture, the way accreditation looks at it. The overall goal for accreditation is school improvement. Now, how you get there as a school is self-assessment. A key component of that self-assessment is the student assessment piece. If you look through the accreditation protocol, you will see the components of the student profile depend heavily on student assessment. Some of that standardized testing for academics, and of course there are non-academic assessments as well. And you've heard today and you know that K-12 education is developmental, incremental, spiraling upward, and it progresses brick upon brick so that missing pieces in a foundation do not negatively affect success at the next level. And the danger of developing gaps this year is real. Without assessment, most teachers will fall back on the one-size-fits-all approach. They'll teach the usual components of next year's curriculum, whether students are ready for those or not. And most kids, well, will they fill them in or not? I wouldn't want to take that for granted as a school or a teacher. So why ACSI and the other accrediting agencies have included concepts of assessment in the accreditation protocols is what we've been talking about today. These pieces of standardized testing inform teachers in terms of why, what they need to know in terms of using these test results. They require that teachers work with people like Lisa in training so that they can use data for program improvement. That is so important. Standardized testing is the single best tool you may have for helping your school get specific information on students. You can use it to disaggregate that data and see who is where compared to grade level expectations. You can use it to analyze trends to see if the changes you made in textbooks or resources or teaching methods have had the desired effect. You can pinpoint who is struggling or who is above expectations. And of course, you can identify adaptations you're going to need to make for next year. So think about this unusual spring. Some students will have been able to master all the curricular objectives in this new delivery system, and some won't. How will teachers know? Some students are more dependent on that face-to-face classroom interaction. Some will have struggled with this online instruction, at least at the beginning. This fall, teachers are going to find students in their classes that have come from a variety of different experiences in the spring, possibly some from public schools that just quit teaching a few weeks ago and maybe just didn't take this instruction seriously. Standardized testing is one tool that teachers will have at their disposal to help them do the very best job possible at the beginning of next year. As Dr. Taylor challenged us to reflect a minute ago, why do we do standardized testing in the first place? This is a great time to think about that. Is it just because it's required or expected of us? I hope that's not the only reason. I hope we're doing it because we realize that it's a significant tool in our toolbox to help us better identify how we're accomplishing our overall outcomes, how we analyze how individual children are progressing, how we are succeeding with subgroups of children, and to help us choose textbooks and other resources to better accomplish our goals. So when the accreditation team comes for a visit, they will ask about school improvement and what tools your school used to be certain that you were teaching the most appropriate skills and content to your students, and that comes from assessment.
Well, thanks for joining us this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to hit a few things more from a different angle, the legal side of things. So I'm Philip Scott. I'm the in-house attorney for ACSI, and just want to address some of the questions I've actually been working with schools over. One of those is just several people have alluded to it. Dr. Taylor alluded to it, but sort of the promise we make to families, right? So in this conversation of discount tuition or tuition being refunded, those type of things, one of the issues that comes up is, are we providing an appropriate grade level education? I think ultimately that's what you're aiming for, and so you can say in good honesty, yes, we're still providing a grade level education, but part of that, right, the more things that you start to cut out, the more you put into question the system you have. I'm not saying you have to do testing in order to shore up your enrollment agreement, but it certainly helps to have it and can cut against you if you don't have it. And so that's just one piece to consider. I think the larger issue, though, is the number of schools I've talked with. There's been a misunderstanding or an assumption, when the Department of Ed canceled testing for the year, or really gave the states the option to cancel testing for the year, that was for the public school testing, right? So you have state curriculum that most states will institute that is mandated to be taught in the public schools, and then they have developed their own state tests to measure attainment on those standards. And often by design and even by definition, in a lot of places, private schools don't do that, right? They build their own curriculum, they go in a different route. Now I know some private schools will take state-based testing, particularly some of those in let's say a choice program, or I'm aware of some states to do athletics, you need to take the state testing, that type of thing. But for the majority of us, we're not in that state high stakes testing world, and those are the tests that have been set aside. And so that's one aspect, and I think for the majority of Christian schools, it's going to have little impact. I think the bigger question has to do at the state level. And when I mean that, states require seat hours, they require certain numbers of days of instruction, and for the most part, those have not been waived yet at the state level. And so that's a bigger question I think we need to kind of slow down and take a look at, is what is the state still going to be requiring of us as private schools? And then where testing comes into play, or other summative measurements, is going to be things where we're compiling now a list of the different states, from school choice programs to vouchers to other state aid. In some places, it's even part of a, if you will, a state licensing or certification to be a private school, that you provide testing data. And I don't mean the state, again, this is sort of our norm reference, the ones we've been talking about today. And so those, again, those have yet to be waived. And so I would just caution people before we start making announcements to parents that testing is canceled, that we're tracking with the state, and we're helping with that certainly, But we're tracking with the state to see at what point, if classroom hours or instructional hours are reduced or waived, or state testing is waived, that doesn't immediately include the testing that we as private schools typically do. And in fact, a lot of times the rules for that don't even fall within the Department of Education. They fall within the Department of Taxation or another department. So there is a lot yet to be figured out. And my concern is that we take a full approach to this, look at this thing from every angle, because the last thing I want to do is risk additional state aid dollars or state participation in programs or scholarships for next year. And so I think, those will get sorted out at the state level. But at this point, most of those conversations have not even started yet. Some have, but again, I think it's just something to take this into account when you're looking at what we're going to do for assessments of our students. So I wanted to put that on the table, make sure that we have some consideration given to that, and I'll pass it back to Cindy and David.
Thank you all for that basic understanding and knowledge. Our first question, I'd like to put it in the context of both teacher summative assessments and standardized testing. And I would like to direct this question to Dr. Wilcox. How can we ensure that students are using the honor code during testing, and what measures should be in place to keep the fidelity of any type of testing?
That's a great question. We have had that come up a number of times, and so I'm going to answer it briefly here, but I will direct you to a PowerPoint presentation that I have on our coronavirus resource page. It's called the Assessment of Online Instruction Presentation, and because I go into depth in that on this topic, so I would direct people to that. So just briefly here, we do need to decide what ways we will assess them. So from spot checking their work to personalizing the assignments to using alternative ways of assessing them like portfolios, things like that. There are certain products like Google Docs has a lock screen option. I know a lot of schools use Google Classroom, so I would hope that they would look into something like that. But there's also a few free products now that are normally paid for subscriptions, like Go Guardian and Education Perfect. So I would suggest that you go and look at that presentation. We can also enlist parents as well. If parents, one thing that Philip and I have recommended is that parents sign an agreement when you move this education online. It's kind of like a field trip permission form, but they need to sign a permission, not a permission, but an agreement that when you move this education online, they have some supervision responsibilities, because the filtering is theirs. Kids are going to be seeing advertisements, but one of those pieces is that they may need to do some supervision of assessments. And so you may need to put that into the parent agreement. So anyway, I have some ideas on that. If people are interested in more details, I would recommend that they go and look at that presentation.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Dr. Wilcox. Our next question for the panel is this. Our concern for fall testing is that after a 3-month hiatus, student recall of the knowledge is not as accurate and therefore of questionable value in determining learning gaps, progress, etc. I have not yet heard any feedback on this concern.
I wouldn't mind jumping in on that. I think it's a valid question, but I think the assumption, if testing is going to be administered, it has to be based on an assumption that the continued learning from the previous year was fully completed. And I think every school is going to be doing that in a variety of creative ways. So if the continued, for example, second grade math, we started the year with a full year of curriculum objectives. We knew exactly what we wanted to present and for kids to master. the assumption on testing is that during this interruption and disruption is that you're still going to fulfill that second grade student's math full year objectives in a creative way, so that the standardized testing, the summative assessment provides a more realistic, a fair result. But going back to what we said earlier too, it will tell that teacher, that parent, probably the second graders probably don't care that much, but it will even tell a student that that learning actually took place and we're ready for the next year, or there are some gaps.
And I would add on to that, that we understand that there is a summer effect, and that there might be some consideration of that, that a week or two in the classroom settling down, that allowing students to feel comfortable back at school, that would be important. And I kind of go back to Lisa's focus on her training, especially in light of this year, that those criterion reference scores are going to provide very baseline information. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is what our students know by objective. And that has to be helpful information. Lisa, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. I'll let you think about that for a second. Also, there's still an option out there that we haven't really talked about, and that is in part of our regular testing program, and that is what we call fall testing. It's usually done in October and November, and it includes fall norms, and the students actually take the test that of the grade level they're in, so that they are being compared at the correct time of year to the students' same grade level. So that's an option as well.
And I did see some different questions about that with regard to testing in the fall versus now. What's so nice about having these extended windows is that you are still going to be able to test at the current grade level the student is in, which is so key in being able to analyze, the impact of instruction based on the circumstances that we're all in. So I did see some schools have been out since, March 16th. Some, it's more recent. We're not sure how long that's going to be, but that assessment is going to give you such an accurate baseline, of which we would be looking at that anyway, right? We would be looking at where our students finished in the prior year, so that we know strategically going into the next year what goals we need to set. And now we're going to have that same view. We're going to be able to look at it in light of the circumstances, and now we're going to be able to make all of those curricular decisions, looking at our pacing guides, looking at our instructional strategies, our maps, and just readjusting that, because the students need to have mastered at least a certain percentage of that content from the year before in order to fairly go into the next school year, into that grade. So that I find that imperative in being able to assess on grade level with spring norms, even going into the fall.
Okay, next question. Have any of you thought of creative ways to draw students into a summer testing week? Suppose we postpone our testing into the summer. For example, maybe having a morning testing session every morning for a week, and having a science Olympiad or a robotics competition or something like that during the summer testing windows. And could you share some of those creative ideas in ways to make these testing weeks fun in the summer?
I think that is such a fabulous idea. I mean, after all of this time of students not being able to engage with one another, to be able to come back on campus and socialize and have those opportunities, with the Math Olympics or different things that you might want to do. But also, engaging parents, setting up those morning or afternoon sessions, letting them know, hey, can you sign up for a day to bring your child so we can provide a diagnostic test is how you can look at it to get that baseline data ahead of school. And that way teachers can get that data into their hands in advance. So I think that's a wonderful concept.
I think that's important, Lisa, what you just said there, because I can see some schools and families saying we can't come up with these weeks because parents have vacation planned and that kind of thing, and so it just won't work. But what you suggested there is families can come with a schedule that could work for them. So I think that's a great point, that it could be done family by family even, and not a whole big block of time. So.
Excellent, excellent responses. Thank you. Here's our next question about the need to go forward with a solid education in this period of time. We've gone online right away with just core subjects, but I have many saying it is burdensome on families, even administrators, and that we should not worry if we don't complete the year, because everyone is in the same boat and nobody will finish the year. So everyone will review in the fall. How would you answer this, panel?
I guess I'll start. For me as a parent, I'm in this same situation with my children, and as a parent, I've already reached out to my school saying, what are your plans for the fall to know where my child is, so you know where to start that instruction. And I think that's key, even though, and I think that's why some of these summer ideas or setting up these sessions ahead of the school year would be helpful. Because then you can go in without maybe taking that additional time to do some assessments. And David has provided some practical examples of how you could do that. But to also, you would be very strategic in your instruction in those first few without automatically going into the school year, business as usual, because it's not going to be, just in light of recent circumstances.
I'd like to jump on that too. Thank you, Lisa. I think it's fair. I mean, there's been unprecedented disruption. I personally think that when this is all over, I think the net gain is going to be overwhelming because of just what we've had to do. But setting that aside, I think, and I'm going to get real technical here. This might not sound real spiritual, but a school head or a school period that takes that posture, if they take the posture of, you know what, there's been too much disruption, and then they say, we'll just pick it up again next year. I think they are inviting a reasonable request for tuition reimbursement. No doubt in my mind. The tuition reimbursements are already coming before they've developed that narrative. And so I don't think we should do this because of financial, if a child was penalized. So again, I go back to the premise. If we have truly fulfilled our objectives for the year, then standardized testing, summative assessment is an educationally sound practice. I would highly caution school heads, trustees to not take this lightly. I know everyone's kind of happy right now that online's going on and we're having online chapels and we're doing this and we're doing that. But there'll be a day when, like a mother just shared, that we're going to get asked, did you finish? Did you finish? And how do I know you finished? Did you measure it? So
I want to jump in as well from a very practical side of things. That might work from going back to the question, if you have all your kids from third grade going to fourth grade, that doesn't sound like such a big thing to do, but that's not the majority of our kids. Our kids move from school to school, and we also have a lot of kids from grades 6 to 12, and they're going to different classes. So if you're going from one kind of science to another kind of science, or you're going from algebra to geometry, You don't have the luxury of just saying, oh, well, we'll finish the last third of algebra in geometry. You have classes that end, and you have to have accomplished that whole class before you move on to the next class. So for a whole lot of our students in a whole lot of their classes, they need to be finished with that class, and we need to make sure they are.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. I think, you know, if we're going to call ourselves Christian schools, then we do hold ourselves to a higher standard, and we want to make sure we're doing that with integrity. And I think a lot of it is just a shift in mentality. A lot of what we're asking now, and rightfully so, is should we, right? I think we're going to have to make that pivot of not should we, but how do we? And when we make that, just that question we ask ourselves, that I think that simple change in perspective helps a lot as well.
Okay, the next question has to do with transferring students. Any thoughts or ideas about what happens if we choose not to do some kind of achievement testing summatively? What happens to students in terms of transferring them to other schools, and will that impact their placement in other schools?
Well, that very well could. I know I talked to a lot of schools that test data is very important as they transfer to a middle school, Christian middle school, or a public middle school or high school. So yes, it very well could affect that.
I'd put the shoe on the other foot. I would agree, and I'd put the shoe on the other foot too, because you're going to be getting students next year who potentially have not been tested or are, you know, the conversation cuts both ways too. I know some schools are concerned we're going to lose students to the public school system. There's another vein of a number where I've seen some families who are shifting from the public school to private schools. And so it's going to cut both ways, but how are you, you know, how would you want, what are you going to be doing when a student comes to you in that same position? I think for private schools, it's a little more precarious because we don't have the Department of Ed of the state or the county who's backing, you know, giving our stamp of approval for our educational product. And so you might see if a public school is going to assess the child not just 3 months later, but it might be some way into the school year when they assess where were they last year or were they in the year. So thought needs to be given if you're not going to do standardized testing. What are again, and this goes back to the tuition issue, what are the ways we can prove that we did provide a quality education, not just to parents, but to that future school that may be accepting them? Or I think a bigger question is with your 12th graders. For those graduating and going on to college, there's some thought that should probably be given there as well.
All right, thank you. Our next question. This is for Dr. Wilcox. We've just finished our third quarter. We have 1 quarter left. What advice would you give as far as how much should be covered versus left out in these last 9 weeks of the school year online learning?
Wow. Well, like Dr. Taylor said earlier, you have your curriculum, you have identified your standards, you've identified your objectives that meet those standards. I think that's what has to drive your overall instruction. It's difficult to say what needs to be left out because, you know, I don't know, I can't speak to what you have in there in the first place, but I think you'd have to just absolutely look at what you have in there. Was some of it more of an enrichment type idea where you're pulling some thoughts together, or was, you know, can you evaluate this is the kind of thing that they have to have as one of those building blocks to succeed at the next grade level? So I think you have to look at it in those, with those glasses on, which says, boy, if they don't get this concept, they're not going to be able to go on to the next grade level. or this one was, okay, that's great, but not as essential. So I think you have to look at success for the next grade level if you have to leave something out.
Okay, thank you. We are just about out of time here, and so we're going to wrap up this portion of the question and answers. As we close out this town hall portion, we encourage you to continue conversations on the ACSI community group thread dedicated to this discussion. You can find a link to that discussion on our coronavirus homepage at acsi.org. We know that teachers are creatively teaching and reaching students. We would love to highlight your teachers and their ideas through social media. Please post to #MyChristianSchool and show us what your teachers are doing. As the hashtag builds, it'll be a great place to get creative ideas from one another. And that includes in this testing arena, sharing your ideas about how you might do some summer testing sessions, whether that's achievement testing or whether it's teacher created assessments. Would love to see what your teachers are doing there.